Section 3.5, active transport, exocytosis and endocytosis. So what is active transport? And what powers this process? Active transport is movement of particles from regions of low concentrations to regions of high concentration. So this is said to be going against the concentration gradient. Active transport uses transport proteins and is powered by ATP. Remember, ATP is the energy currency of the cell, the source of energy for metabolic reactions in the cell. So why do cells need to use active transport? Active transport is used to get needed molecules, stuff that is needed by the cell, regardless of concentration gradient, regardless of how the concentration gradient is across the membrane, to maintain homeostasis. Okay, most of the time things are getting transported in and out of the cell to maintain homeostasis, and sometimes it has to go against the concentration gradient to keep this balance. So what is a key feature of active transport proteins? And then explain. All of them use energy in the form of ATP to move a substance against the concentration gradient. Transport proteins, all these things span the membrane, meaning they go from outside the membrane to outside the cell to inside the cell through the cell membrane. Most of these guys are going to change shape when they bond to target molecules, the specific molecules that they're going to be transporting in or out of the cell. Some will bind to only one kind of molecule. Others can bind to two different types of molecules. Some will move molecules in the same direction, and others move molecules in opposite directions. We have a couple examples here, right? This one is called the sodium-potassium pump. What the sodium-potassium pump does is it moves 3 sodium ions out of the cell while simultaneously moving 2 potassium molecules into the cell. Same protein, moving 2 different ions in different directions. Sodium ions out, 3 ions out, 2 potassium ions in. This is another one which is kind of an example of the proton pump or the hydrogen ion pump, where it's pumping hydrogen ions across the cell membrane. I just mentioned how the sodium potassium pump works. Okay, this is a cell membrane pump. And again, 3 sodium ions will be pumped out of the cell for every 2 potassium ions being pumped in. Both of these ions are going against the concentration gradient because there'll be a buildup of sodium ions outside the cell and a buildup of potassium ions inside the cell. And this process requires energy from the cell to function. Besides cell membrane pumps, a cell might also use energy to move materials in or out of the cell if those substances are very large. Okay, it's going to require energy, and the transport in or out of the cell will be through these organelles, these membrane-bound sacs or vesicles, which allow substances to enter or exit cell without going through the membrane because they're composed of the same material as the cell membrane. They can literally fuse with the cell membrane and deposit substances outside or form from the cell membrane and bring those substances inside the cell. And this would be another type of active transport. So endocytosis is a type of active transport that's going to use a vesicle to transport liquids or relatively large molecules into the cell. How it does this is it engulfs them in the cell membrane. So if this is a big chunk of food outside the cell here, the cell would have little receptors. These are receptors on the cell membrane that would recognize this as being necessary, and the cell membrane would wrap around this, pinch off, form a vesicle, and then pull it inside the cell. So it literally just engulfs it and brings it inside the cell. Okay, so what is phagocytosis? It's a specific type of endocytosis where the cell membrane engulfs large particles. This is how your immune system works, or one of the ways your immune system works. Taking these chunks of stuff, it could be a bacteria or a virus, and just engulfing it, bringing it into the cell and killing it rather than letting it replicate in your body. So phagocytosis is a specific type of endocytosis, bringing stuff into the cell in order to get rid of it. Exocytosis would be the opposite. Exo, meaning it's exiting the cytoplasm or exiting the cell. Okay, this is the movement of substance out of a cell by the vesicle forming inside the cell, fusing with the cell membrane, and then depositing the contents of that vesicle outside. So here's the vesicle forming inside the cell. Remember, it is made up of the same phospholipid bilayer as the cell membrane. This fuses with the cell membrane here and deposits stuff outside. So which body systems frequently use endocytosis, and how does this happen? Well, your nervous system uses exocytosis when it's taking vesicles filled with this neurotransmitter. Remember, neurotransmission is an electrical chemical signal. Neurotransmitter's in here. It'll fuse with the cell membrane of this nerve cell, pass it through the synapse, the junction between the two cells, and it'll get absorbed into the other cell. Okay, so this neurotransmitter is stored in vesicles and moved from cell A to cell B through this process of exocytosis.